After a bit of a sophomore slump with the second season of Westworld, the writers had to try and get the show back on the right track. With criticisms of the confusing timelines, questionable character decisions, and pacing issues, the third season of the show worked to resolve these issues. But there was a much larger task ahead of them, and that was turning Westworld, this unique story about a theme park set in the Wild West, into Westworld, a sci-fi, dystopian, cyberpunk, whatever you want to call it show, based on a futuristic society. This was a pretty tall order, because not only are you trying to bounce back from a slump of a season, but you're also changing the entire identity of the show. If you didn't like how Season 2 went out and explored other parks besides the West, then you certainly weren't going to like Season 3. But instead of trying to surprise the audience with such a monumental change, they went full force with the marketing for this season, embracing this change. The first trailer for this season was seemingly for an entirely different show. When the Westworld logo popped up, it was surprising, but overall the marketing did its job, and I was excited to see this change in the show. Aaron Paul joining the cast was supposed to be this reinvigoration of the show, much like how Rob Lowe and Adam Scott joined Parks and Rec and gave that show new life. And to their credit, Aaron Paul added a lot of value to this show. He added the perspective of your everyday person just going through life, not somebody who could ever afford the $40,000 a day price tag to enter the park. So he was incredibly relatable to the audience. Despite all these promising changes, Westworld Season 3 continued to struggle, and just a season later, the show would ultimately end up getting cancelled. From HBO's promising new show, to what was supposed to be their next tentpole show after Game of Thrones, to struggling to find viewers and being cancelled, all in the span of just 36 episodes. So in this video, I'm going to be going over Seasons 3 and 4 of Westworld, where they went wrong, where they went right, and how there's still some hope to see the 5th and final season of the show some way or somehow. You guys absolutely killed my 3,000 like goal for this video. Thank you for all the support on the first video of the series. It's been absolutely insane, and I got this video out as quickly as I possibly could for all of you. So let's exit the park and head into the real world, try to help a robot take over the world, and then somehow make our way back into the park as we talk about HBO's biggest failure, Westworld. Leaving the park was always the natural progression for this series. We got a few glimpses of the outside world in Season 2, and Dolores talking extensively about leaving and taking over their world, but no matter which way you swing it, Season 3 was a huge risk for this series to take. They could have found a reason to keep Dolores and the story in the park, but then you run into the Lost problem, where the studio wanted to go for more seasons, so by Season 3, the writers were struggling with ways to keep everybody on the island. Westworld learned from this and brought the story ahead, not keeping them in the park at all, for better or worse. The gimmick of this show is that there's parks, not this real futuristic world. If I want to see something like that, there's Blade Runner. The parks are the whole identity of this show. It's what makes it unique. So you take that away, and basically you have a reskinned Blade Runner. But anyways, we're brought into this super futuristic world. Except, is it really that futuristic? It's kind of funny because a lot of the technology presented in this world, even just a few years ago, seemed super futuristic, but now a lot of it is actually real. Glasses where you can see virtual worlds, self-driving ugly cars, being on the phone with an AI. All of this stuff is now in our world just 5 years after the season aired, which again, makes me feel like Westworld as an actual park to visit probably isn't that far off. We see very quickly how this season works to resolve some of those issues that people had with Season 2, specifically with all the timelines and where or when everything is, so they added in this quick intro intro to most of the scenes showing exactly where everything is taking place. The storylines as a whole are much more streamlined, there's no jumping around multiple timelines in this season, and everything is more or less pretty linear, but again, for better or worse. Obviously a big draw of the season is the addition of Aaron Paul as Caleb Nichols. Caleb's whole introductory scene feels like a completely different show. In fact, this entire first episode feels like an entirely different show, but that's also done on purpose. The monotony of his life also reflects the hosts' lives, specifically Dolores, and we can see the mirror parallel with the shots of them waking up. Not only does he mirror Dolores, but he also mirrors William, looking for a new purpose in life when he comes across Dolores stumbling out of the dark and falling into their arms. Caleb has a bit of a mysterious past, but we learn enough about him and about this world through his point of view that I was completely bought in by this new character. There were also quite a few changes to Dolores' character. She's still ruthless, but against people that we can get behind her being ruthless towards. She's also much smarter, more calculated, and has an actual plan that we're seeing play out in real time. When her and Caleb's paths cross, it seems easy to see where this is going. That Caleb will become her new Teddy, and that is ultimately what happens this season, but Caleb also very purposefully has a lot more agency than Teddy ever had. It's also nice to see that Dolores is much more caring this time around. It seemed like Season 2 Dolores wouldn't care at all about Caleb Nichols, but she goes out of her way to save him in this season. It does kind of feel like a different character than we saw in Season 2, but I think this season got Dolores right by still giving her that villain title, but as an audience we can sympathize and root for her cause, and I think Caleb has a big hand in that feeling. So we check in on all of our main characters, add a new one, but where's Maeve? Oh, I guess she's in, Nazi World? Oh, sorry, War World. Now this seems like a really strange park. Living in the Wild West? Yeah, I get that. As a samurai or a ninja? Hell yeah. Going on a safari? Yeah, sure. But fighting in World War II? I don't know, doesn't really capture me the same way. She runs into Hector. Now, let's talk about Hector for a second. Everybody needs to get them a guy like Hector. No matter how many times Maeve has threatened him or left him for dead, he always comes back to her, even if it's not written in his code like Lee says in Season 2. 100% loyal Hector, we gotta love him. Even though he's been reprogrammed and actually doesn't recognize Maeve, I feel like I gotta mention it. Bernard travels back to Westworld and goes to the bunker and finds Stubbs, who, guess what, is also a host, which is a strange twist that really comes out of nowhere. Twists like this are really stupid to me because it's like, oh, who else is a host? Is Caleb a host? Is William? Was Ford really a host this whole time? I don't know. Maybe this was foreshadowed enough and I just didn't catch it in Season 2. Let me know that in the comments if I'm just dumb. Maeve finds out that this world she's in isn't real at all. Sizemore didn't survive, and all of this is programmed. We see David Benioff and D.B. Weiss with a dragon that belongs in Medieval World. I wonder if all the storylines in that park that we never actually get to see all start out really, really great, just to end horribly. This should have been a really clever nod to Game of Thrones, another HBO show, like it was passing the torch of relevancy over to Westworld, but instead, I'm pissed about Game of Thrones again, and I'm pissed about Westworld getting bad. Anyways, Maeve ends up overloading the system and getting her own brain out with the help of a robot. The season does a lot of cool things like this with the cinematography. I think the writers and everybody involved here were just really on board with the whole sci-fi idea, and to their credit, the actual filming is maybe the best of all the seasons so far. But she wakes up in the real world and meets Sirach, the owner of Rehoboam, and he wants Maeve to kill Dolores. And with this revelation, the whole direction of the show, if it wasn't clear already, becomes abundantly clear. This whole show is about two characters, Dolores and Maeve. This is full-on their show. It's like when Game of Thrones solely became about Jon and Daenerys, and sure, there's some secondary characters like Bernard and William, but this is the girls' show, and it's so weird with the appearance of David and Dan. It's almost like this show is hurling itself towards the finish line just like their show did. But personally, I actually have no issue with this. The show has always been about Maeve and Dolores as hosts, Ford and William as humans, and to throw any and all twists they possibly can with Bernarnold. And it's at the very least a very solid direction for the show to go in. Dolores' motivation is incredibly solid. She wants to take her revenge on the humans. Classic bad guy motivation, but Maeve has no real reason to be the good guy for the humans, which is why Serac eventually offers her the chance to go to the robot afterlife to see her daughter, which I feel like is a strange motivation. We just saw the whole conclusion to that story last season. Maeve sacrificed her own life so that way her daughter could live on without her and live on with her new mom. It was an emotional moment, but now she's just gonna do all of that again? If she gets to her daughter in the Sublime, what's gonna be different? She's still not gonna be her mom, so I just don't really understand why we're going through this whole storyline again. I don't buy it as a motivation for her anymore. It just kind of seems like a convenient way to pit Maeve and Dolores against each other. It's funny because the season splits up everything into different point of view characters we know, while also trying to promote Caleb as this new sort of protagonist. But I actually think this hurts the pacing of the season and the overall story. I found Caleb to be by far the most interesting character, probably because we don't know a lot about him, but he's also the character who goes on the typical hero's journey. He's got a boring, ordinary life, a bit of a shady past, meets Dolores and steps into an extraordinary world, but we also take a break from his point of view in the entire second episode, step into fake Charlotte's perspective for a good chunk of the third episode, so even though they fixed the whole multiple confusing timelines aspect, they didn't fix the pacing. Scenes end and start presumably hours later instead of layering the different points of view to give the impression that time passes. This is something that Game of Thrones did really well for such a long time, but Westworld really shied away from in this season. Again, I really think the appearance from David and Dan just kinda cursed the show. Despite spending a lot of time with characters like Dolores, Charlotte, Bernard, and Maeve, I wanted to learn more from the perspective of Caleb, see his reaction to the hosts entering the real world, learn more about Westworld from the perspective of somebody who has never gone, a real normal person. Oddly enough, that's something this show has never really covered before, and it was very interesting to me. It took me until this season to realize it, but the show loves to create mysteries, but leave them so incredibly ambiguous that a lot of what you're watching just doesn't really make sense until the second time you watch it. We're not told who Charlotte actually is, we don't know why she's freaking out or which host she is, and this goes along with a twist later on, but the scenes you're watching with her initially are so confusing. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to know who this was or not. I think this whole show was trying to achieve the prestige effect, something that Jonathan Nolan also wrote, where the second time you watch the movie, you really get a completely different experience, but that doesn't really work for TV, especially not with a show like Westworld. Sure, you might get some hardcore fans to rewatch an entire series or an entire season. Typically, I'm one of those people, but I also didn't really feel like rewatching this season after it was over. Instead, what the season in particular actually achieves is something like the Dark Knight Rises effect, where previous chapters were so successful that you kind of just have to go along with the stuff that's happening, even though there's mountains of plot holes and just overall story beats that don't make sense. We learn more about this guy Serac and how he's supposedly the big bad of the series. From the very start, they've been smuggling out the data for him, he's the one who's been pulling the strings, and now he's here. He's in charge of this device, Rehoboam, which is a really stupid name for this device, by the way. I get what it's supposed to be emulating, but for real, this could have been called any number of catchier things. But Rehoboam is an algorithm that can track every move before anybody makes it, and Serac is able to use this device to stop world-altering events. So Dolores wants to stop this device because it'll topple the system and create chaos in the world. But I don't know, I just didn't really find Serac to be that great of a villain. I don't really find him very intimidating, even in the scenes he's supposed to be intimidating in. I'm also very confused by his motivations and why they're supposedly evil. He doesn't want money, he doesn't even really want power, it's just to keep the world churning and safe. At least this is what we're led to believe for a majority of the season, and this just doesn't seem like an evil motivation to me. If there was a way to prevent wars before they start, then I don't know, that sounds like a good thing to me. Dolores is a direct threat to Serac because Rehoboam can't account for her actions. She's a wild card that has the capability of destroying everything. He also needs her because all of the park data is in her head, so when he gets that, it'll perfect Rehoboam's algorithm. So we have these different reasons for these people to be at odds, but I also don't know which character I'm supposed to like and root for, and which one I should be against. So in that way, I guess it is a little bit like The Prestige. Across the first 4 episodes, we've seen William once, in the 4th episode, Bernard once, Maeve once, and this is the halfway point of the season. The pacing of the season is just awful. It reminds me of some of those bad seasons of The Walking Dead, where there would be weeks upon weeks before you'd see Rick Grimes again, because every episode would be a singular storyline. And not that that worked, it worked better because at least the seasons were longer, but this is now halfway through the season, and there isn't really any sort of stakes whatsoever because the story has progressed so little. That being said, episode 4 is actually a pretty great episode, because it progresses all the storylines at once. This is, again, something that The Walking Dead would do, wait until the bigger mid-season episodes to have all the storylines come together, or to have multiple points of view, but the show used to have multiple different points of view every episode, so when this isn't the case, it makes for a much slower pace. It's like this season is overcorrecting for the mistakes of season 2. There were so many storylines and so many different points of view that the story was confusing. So now the show is taking it so slow so that way people can understand once again, but it's so slow that it makes the show boring. The storylines all converge with Bernard and Ashley trying to save this guy Liam Dempsey from Dolores and Caleb, while Maeve is on her own separate mission to try and track down Dolores, and the reveal comes that all these different hosts, Charlotte, Martin, and Musashi, are all just copies of Dolores. Again, this makes some of the previous things with Charlotte make more sense, but I think the show just needed some big reveal to go in the 4th episode, so instead of just coming right out and saying, oh yeah, all these people are copies of Dolores, it kept us guessing. Episode 5 is one of the most unique, actually now that I'm done watching, it is the most unique episode of the entire show. And while it feels a little out of place in a show like Westworld, personally, I really liked it. Liam stabs Caleb with this drug called genre, which makes his entire world and perspective switch in and out of different movie genres. This comes with some incredibly interesting cinematography as his life switches from film noir to action to romance to drama and then to horror. There's references to other movies like Apocalypse Now and The Shining, and overall this is just a very fun episode. There's a funny moment where Caleb looks at Dolores like she's the love of his life because the genre he's in is romance, and she's kind of just like, what are you doing? Start shooting. And it got a good chuckle out of me. During the drama section of the episode is when Dolores sends out what Rehoboam predicts out of everybody's life, and we see people's reactions to this, specifically what a mother reads about her young daughter's life, and this is a good scene to get us back in line with Dolores' mission. She's trying to topple the system and what it says about everybody, so for the time being, she's not trying to enslave humanity and to have them be at her beck and call, so it's easy to root for her once again. Now let's talk some more about Serac, and how his plan is just too confusing. 6 episodes into the season, I had no clue what his motivation actually was. He just wants to keep the world in check, put people in boxes. I mean, okay, I get thematically this is all about how people are supposed to live their lives and not be confined to certain boxes that society puts us in, but I didn't really see how he was this evil villain we're supposed to root against. It's not like the world would end if he does find her. In fact, the world would just continue on, and the world ends if Dolores wins. The stakes in this season just feel weird because there's not really any one person to root for. When he gets control of the park, he just wants to destroy it and all of the hosts, destroying any and all hope of us ever going back to Westworld. Now that is an evil motivation I can get behind. Yeah, now I want to stop this guy. In the penultimate episode, we learned that he was taking people called outliers in for reconditioning because there's a chance that they might cause issues in society, and if they can't be fixed, then they get Captain America. See, now that makes sense. Now I get why Sirach is a bad guy and we're supposed to root against him. Glad I finally feel that way 7/8 of the way into the season. But again, this is all formatted like this because they needed to have their big reveal with Caleb's backstory. And don't get me wrong, Caleb's backstory is great. It's a tense and heartbreaking sequence, but I also don't feel like these reveals needed to be connected in any sort of way. We could have learned more about Sirach and how he takes outliers in like the second or third episode, and then had them come back to this place and learn of Caleb's backstory. His backstory would still pack a punch, but we'd also have a concrete reason to dislike Sirach early on. Once again, Ed Harris is such a delight to see on screen, which is weird because by episode 6, this is only the second episode of the season he's actually been in. He's finally coming to terms with his mistakes and realizing that playing the game messed with his mind so much. And he's only in this little of the season because they just didn't really know what else to do with him. And the same goes with Bernard and Ashley. They kind of pop in when the story needs them to, wherever that might be, but we don't really know their motivations other than stopping Dolores. Why they go where they do, how they get there, all those traveling moments we just don't get to see. The whole Dolores versus Maeve stuff is cool to see in both the penultimate and the last episode. It's entertaining. The clash in motivations, particularly with Maeve's, feels a bit rocky to me, but this was just meant to be an entertaining fight. This was one of those things that they had as a plan for the season, and they were like, okay, how do we get here? And just kind of filled in the gaps along the way. Nothing proves this better than by having a whole training sequence for Maeve in the episode prior doing hand-to-hand combat, just to have Maeve go in with a samurai sword instead. Why? Because it looks cool, and she learned how to use it in the last season, but not very well since she literally can't hold onto it to save her life. Oh, and it also gave her Hector's death as another motivation, which seems better to me than getting to see her daughter anyways. Caleb really does end up being like the chosen one for this story. He has a very typical hero's journey. His background makes him special, which is why a mentor came to him, but there's this evil twist on it, because she's not coming to him to save the world, she's coming to him because he can be the leader who destroys it. And honestly, I really like that whole aspect of the season. I'd say I wish that there was even more on Caleb, but I already talked about how there's so little scenes with William and Bernard, so I guess I'll just say I wish this season was paced better and included all of them. Multiple storylines every episode, just like how Season 1 and Season 2 had. There's not multiple timelines, so there's not as much confusion this time around, but it's like this season is too simplified. The finale itself is pretty good. I'm not too sure why it's as lowly rated as it is. I think it might just be people rating the season as a whole, but I didn't really have a lot of issues with it. It gets a little preachy about how humans can choose to be better, but it's not a bad message. A little dramatic, but overall it's a very cinematic and I'd say satisfying ending. In fact, the entire back half of this season is enjoyable, much more so than the first half. The season as a whole is very ambitious. A little too ambitious for its own good, perhaps, but honestly, I commend them for trying. The villain is lackluster, the pacing is atrocious, and a lot of the characters just don't have anything to do. Like, if you took out Bernard, Ashley, and William from this entire season, then literally nothing changes whatsoever. They have no important impact on the overall storyline by the time the credits roll. They do have some end credit sequences, so there's that, I guess, but the show just kind of lost the plot on what people wanted to see, turning it into something completely different, but I do think that they made the season that they intended on making. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to you. Personally, I think there was a lot to like about the season, but I also think that there was way too many missteps along the way. Sure, they took out all the time-hopping confusion, but the story was also so simplified that by the time we got to the end, I feel like we took giant leaps in the story to actually arrive there. They had written the whole Maeve versus Dolores stuff and Caleb as a new protagonist, and those aspects of the story worked, but they also had these two other powerhouse actors on contract, so they just wrote in little side stories for them. It doesn't really feel like a complete story by the end because the characters and their stories didn't combine into anything super impactful or memorable. Overall, I'll give season 3 a 6.8 out of 10. I know a lot of people tell me how generous I am with my ratings, but I always tend to look at the positives of anything that I watch, and personally, I commend this season for taking such an ambitious approach to everything. While it's not really what I wanted to see out of the show, I did like some of the things this season did. So immediately upon starting up season 4, I had to go back and look at the discs, because I thought, surely this isn't the beginning of the season. The opening scene just makes absolutely no sense. Who are these people? Why does William want to buy the dam? What's going on with all these flies? Why should I care? I didn't know the answers to any of these questions. And as the first episode continues on, this just doesn't seem like a continuation of season 3. This kind of feels like what season 5 of the show would be, and I just never watched season 4. We're shown flashbacks of Maeve and Caleb on some mission, and it seems like this is something that we definitely would have seen before, kind of like an integrated previously on segment in the show, but no, we never saw that. I would have liked to. It would have been a much better opening scene than the one we got. In a lot of ways, I think the backlash to season 3 almost forced the writers to do a full reset again and start over in season 4 with this new kind of pilot episode. And there's more that feels different with this episode than just how jarring it starts. It feels so much more different even compared to season 3 because the dialogue is just horrendous. Everything is so on the nose and cliche. Caleb's worker talks about how there's no more robots because of the war, and it's like, what? What war are you talking about? We're just skipping past all of that through a line of exposition? Dolores, Christina and her roommate have a very CW-style conversation, and everything about the writing felt so silly. Not to mention there was a noticeable budget decrease in this episode and this entire season. There's some terrible-looking CGI fire in the first episode, and throughout the entire season, a lot of the wide shots don't look like these futuristic cities that we saw in season 3. It kind of just looks like New York with some extra stuff painted on the sides. Maeve pulls a Dexter early on into the season and goes to live in the frozen small-town wilderness, where she runs into... Wait a minute, the billionaire from Dexter New Blood? Is this actually some sort of crossover? Oh, look at that, it is! Caleb went from being on the hero's journey in the last season to an old grizzled veteran who's forced to come out of retirement for one last mission. Except this plays out far more like threat level Midnight than it does John Wick.
Look, I am the one who brought this upon us, and I am the one who has to end it.
Tell him I'm retired.
It's Golden Face.
This makes it personal.
But speaking of both Caleb and Maeve, it seems like we're missing an entire season of character and dynamic development out of them. Where we last left them, they were basically just meeting and teaming up. Now they're just old friends, and there's so much context that we're missing as an audience. And I take issue with this because their dynamic is really great. Really one of the few highlights of this entire season. I would have liked to see more of it and learn how they actually became this close. But our new protagonist of the season on the hero's journey is Christina. She lives a pretty average life as a writer living in this futuristic city, going on dates and getting stalked, but she's saved by a tall, dark, and mysterious figure. Wait a minute, this is starting to sound oddly like those sci-fi romance books in the supermarket, but this tall, dark, and handsome man is actually Teddy, which is great. I can't wait to learn more about him, why he's here, how he's here in the next episode, or, when we see him next, when we're over halfway into the season. I'll talk more about Christina later, but this first episode is, bar none, the worst episode of the entire series. If this was the pilot episode, I would not continue watching, and if I was watching this week to week, then I also probably wouldn't watch past this episode, especially after waiting 2 years from the end of season 3. Everything from the writing to the visual effects just took a noticeable dip, but since I didn't have to wait week to week, I was thankfully just able to watch the next episode. Maeve and Caleb eventually make their way back into the park, which is something that everybody wanted to see, and it's also a new park called Peaky Blinders World, and we get the same robbery scene and everything. This is a cool park, and I can't wait to spend more than 2 episodes here, because surely that's what's gonna happen, right? And again, their dynamic and scenes together are really great. I would have liked to see more of these scenes and to see their relationship grow organically, but with this show and this season, I'll take what I can get. Bernard comes out from his VR game session and has this newfound need to save the world, but the whole time he's been gone, he's been doing his best Doctor Strange impression by going through every scenario until he gets to the one that allows them to win. Sorta. So all of Bernard's scenes kind of have this Groundhog Day element to them. He knows exactly what's going to happen, gives the odds of what could happen if he doesn't know, and this adds some fun to this storyline. At the very least, it's entertaining to watch. He eventually comes across the Resistance, which is a weird thing to have because apparently the war has already been fought and won. So this raises a big question mark, but this eventually goes back to what I was saying. The full picture of the story and the season makes more sense upon a second watch, not so much the first time you're going through it. But episode 4, as has been a trend with the past 2 seasons, is a very strong episode. We spend some more time in the park, learn more about all these flies and what they actually mean, get a huge reveal about Caleb, and end with an actually good reveal of there being multiple timelines. Bernard's stuff takes place in the far future with the Resistance because there still is a war going on. Everything with Maeve and Caleb was in the past, and now it's been 23 years since both Maeve and Caleb died. Charlotte ended up actually taking over the world with her parasitic flies and winning. I liked everything about this reveal. I thought it was really smart writing, makes everything that didn't make sense in the first 4 episodes make more sense, and sets up the second half of the season nicely with Bernard getting their new weapon, which is actually Maeve. Ed Harris continues with his antagonistic role in this season, mostly because it's not actually William, but a clone that Charlotte made of him, which is essentially all the worst parts of William personified. They keep real William in this Spider-Man suit and freeze him, and as usual, Ed Harris is great, though I do feel like in some of his scenes, he's kinda just phoning this one in as well. I think with the budget going down this season meant that the budget to pay Ed Harris also went down, so for a lot of his scenes this season, I felt like his best scene partner was, well, Ed Harris. Seeing the conversations between the 2 Williams gives us some of the best dialogue of the season, but unfortunately, these moments are few and far between. Charlotte Hale shares the role of the other antagonist of the season, and this is a character that has far outstayed her welcome. Especially because this isn't even her acting as Dolores anymore. This is basically just if Charlotte Hale had lived past season 2. I wasn't a big fan of her character then, I don't think we were supposed to be, but I just find her to be a really aggravating character, particularly in this season. A lot of her performance just seems really robotic, and not even in a purposeful or good way. It just seems like she didn't want to be here. And I'm singling her out because she feels the cheesiest, but really from top to bottom, everything seems pretty cheesy. Maeve's one-liners are dialed up to 11, Caleb kind of gets those cheesy quips that main characters have, especially now that he's turned into this John Wick coming out of retirement character. They kind of have the same sort of dialogue.
But now, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
You're still going to lose.
But all of Charlotte's dialogue is extremely obvious and cliche, and it just didn't really seem like this is even the same show as the previous 3 seasons. And yeah, that's me giving season 3 a compliment. Going back to Christina, it's not until over halfway into the season where she first meets her mentor/love interest, because the other storylines had to catch up to this point where we realized what this world actually was. Her storyline is slow. We get like 3 different shots of her waking up per episode. Yes, I get the parallels of having loops, but they also already covered this back in season 3 with Caleb and how monotonous his life actually was. It also seems like they had James Marsden back in this role because they needed to try and win back some good faith with the audience. Yeah, it's thematic that he's here, but it also doesn't really make any sense. He tells Christina that she's like a god in this world and she's the one responsible for all the storylines, which is weird because Dolores was never the storyteller. That was always Maeve's power. And I feel like if they were gonna go the route of being a writer, I feel like Enzo from the Vampire Diaries here really should have been played by the guy who played Lee Sizemore. But throughout this whole season, I couldn't help but feel like this really feels like the final season, because where else would they even go from here? The robots won. They took over the world, enslaved the humans through the use of the bugs and this magical tower that controls them. This is the end game of a story like this. The beginning was the hosts learning that they're hosts. The end is them ruling the world. There's a lot of reversal of themes that's pretty blatantly stated. Charlotte says she's bored in this world because she's done everything and is the ruler, but she also can't quit this world because of its many pleasures, because now the hosts play around with the humans as much as they want to. So the hosts have become just as bad as the humans were, which means that no matter what, the future and whoever takes over, it's just gonna be all bad, guys. The second half of the season turns into a fairly basic apocalyptic end of the world scenario, except we don't ever actually see how this world turned into an apocalypse. It had nothing to do with the end of season 3 apparently, just all these bugs. These people who are divergent, outliers, they're the ones who get to join the resistance and fight against the Terminator, the host overlords. There's the guy who was supposed to lead the resistance, trapped behind enemy lines, the host working from within to try and stop everything by getting another host to come and fight for the resistance, and then there's everything going on with Christina, which becomes the real outlier of a storyline because it doesn't have anything to do with anything else. The only glimpse of hope comes from Bernard and Maeve, who have, I guess, forgiven whatever the humans did to them in the park, and they're the ones fighting for humanity to be freed, which gives both of their characters a full circle moment and proves that even if humanity is doomed, maybe some of our ChatGPT bots will actually be fighting for us in the future. But William ultimately wins and kills both Bernard and Maeve, turning the world into his own personal LARPing simulation. And the person who comes up to stop him is Charlotte Hale. She comes back after getting shot in the head, where they literally just explained that one shot to the head actually kills them, and after everything that's happened this season, we're supposed to be rooting for Charlotte to take down the Man in Black. This is all literally because of her. I'm not rooting for her. I don't like this character. She has no redeeming qualities. I have zero sympathy for her. So the story just loses me going into this final episode. Especially when this means we don't get Maeve back, meaning that the last ever scene with Maeve in this series is her getting killed. No resolution for probably the greatest character in the entire series. All that motivation to go and see her daughter again? Yeah, it goes nowhere. The last 2 episodes of the season give us a couple fighting matchups like Maeve and Charlotte, which does its best Maeve versus Dolores impression from the last season, but it's not nearly as exciting, and it ends with the Man in Black killing both of them. Clementine versus Caleb and his daughter comes down to Caleb needlessly fighting with her, even though his daughter had a bullet and could have killed her way sooner. And then we have Charlotte versus the Man in Black, the final battle of the series. And we're supposed to be rooting for Charlotte here, even though the entire other 7 episodes of the season, she was the antagonist. Is this some commentary about how all the good guys lose, and at the end of the day, evil will always be fighting other evil? I'm gonna choose to look at it that way, because if not, then this is just 2 characters that are copies and hosts of other people fighting each other, even though we have no real reason to care for either of them. Caleb does have an emotional send-off with his daughter, and over the course of the last 2 seasons, Caleb has really been what grounds this story in a human way, and his storyline this season does make the emotional payoff feel, well, emotional. Even though he never asks about his wife and what happened to her, the story just kind of forgets all about her. The season leaves it open-ended for everybody to return to the park, so that way Dolores can decide who gets to continue to live or die, both humans and hosts alike, because they'll all be part of her story. But of course, that never happened because there was not another season, leaving the final season of the show and Dolores' story in that final season to feel entirely lackluster. For this season, for the series to end with Charlotte Hale being the main character, just feels all kinds of wrong. That's like if Game of Thrones ended with, like, Arya going up against the Night King. Wait a minute. Despite a pretty strong middle of the season, Season 4 disappoints in every capacity. The writing isn't as strong, the performances aren't as strong, the CGI looks awful at times, and I don't feel like there was really any need to continue except for a lackluster open-ended finale. This was the final season. This was the end to the story. If the final episode had been changed to where Bernard's efforts actually ended up saving the human race instead of leaving it open for Dolores to be the judge there, then this is a proper series finale. But everything just feels kind of cheap. Maeve doesn't get a proper ending, which is honestly the main thing I'm mad about. Dolores was sidelined in this season to not even really adding anything to the overall plotline, and I just came out very, very unsatisfied. So I'm going to give Season 4 a pretty generous 5.7 out of 10. So in the last video, a lot of comments were asking me how this could possibly be HBO's biggest failure, so allow me to explain with both stats and opinions. So the average episode rating for Season 3 was an 8.02, down from Season 2's episode average of an 8.38, and Season 4's episode average was a 7.91. Not too far off from Season 3's due to strong ratings from the middle episodes, but it's bookended by the two lowest rated episodes of the series, and I'd say deservingly so. But despite their episode ratings being pretty similar, it was really the viewers that put this show in the grave. Remember how I said that if I had watched the first episode, I wouldn't continue? Well, all those kinds of people didn't even tune into the first episode whatsoever. With each episode getting well under 1 million views when it first aired, this is not going to get you renewed for another season on a platform like HBO. So why do I consider Westworld to be HBO's biggest failure? Sure, there's the ratings and the viewership, but I ultimately think this is HBO's biggest failure because of what the show was supposed to be and how it's treated today. The first season cemented this as HBO's next big show. It had absolutely everything going for it, but as it turns out, that season was just lightning in a bottle, and something that the show was never able to replicate again. Nowadays, HBO is seemingly so ashamed of this show, it's not even available on their platform. A lot of people brought up Game of Thrones Season 8 as their biggest failure, and I definitely see the argument there. In fact, I'll even say that all seasons of Westworld are far better than Season 8 of Game of Thrones, but HBO still markets the hell out of that show. There's already a spin-off show, with another one on the way, and apparently many more after that coming. Westworld never got a spin-off because it wasn't popular enough to even end its actual storyline with a 5th season. HBO would never dare take Game of Thrones off their service because even though it had a terrible ending, it still makes them money and they can still market that show. Other comments brought up things like The Idol, and yeah, that was a disaster. HBO sometimes produces duds here and there, but those are forgotten and never really talked about again. Westworld, clearly from the views of my last video, is still talked about. It's still relevant because of how disastrous it was. Other comments were talking about how True Detective was their biggest failure, and I see that argument because True Detective also had one really good season and a bunch of other mediocre to bad seasons, but the other seasons of True Detective don't take away from the greatness of Season 1, because Season 1 was a self-contained story told from beginning to end. The performance and quality of other Westworld seasons absolutely takes away from the first season, because it wasn't a complete story, and if you want to see the complete story, well, you never will, because the show never got finished. At least it hasn't been yet. Now, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up or anything like that. I haven't personally heard anything, but there have been a few things out there, like Aaron Paul saying he hopes that the story can be finished eventually, and that there's been talks about doing it, and with the growing popularity of the show, I think it's entirely possible that we could get that 5th and final season. It just wouldn't be on HBO. HBO has wiped their hands clean of this series, but someone like Amazon or even Apple TV could certainly pick up and continue this story for all these remaining hardcore fans, especially if a few more join them over the course of the next few months or years. So those are all my thoughts on Westworld. I want to thank everybody watching this video to this point. The last video blew my expectations out of the water. I hope you enjoyed both of these videos and let me know what you want to see next. I can tell you I've got some big videos in the works, and you should subscribe if you liked these videos. Special thanks to all my channel members. You guys are the best, and I'll see you all in the next one.